She cleaned the floors of their law firm for 12 years, never once spoken to, never once seen. But when a $10 million lawsuit vanishes overnight, the only fingerprints on the shredded documents are hers. And now, the same lawyers who ignored her are calling her a thief. But what if she was the only one trying to protect the truth? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The headquarters of Thornton Dynamics stood like a glass cathedral in downtown Chicago. 45 stories of steel, polished chrome, and quiet entitlement. Inside its pristine lobbies and echoing marble halls, every detail screamed perfection. No speck of dust escaped scrutiny, no scuff mark dared linger on the floors. And that was in part thanks to Clarence Miles. He moved like clockwork, pushing his cart of supplies past towering artwork and echoing conference rooms filled with executives who barely noticed his presence. He had the quiet rhythm of someone who'd mastered invisibility. Head down, posture unthreatening, eyes fixed only on the ground in front of him, as if he were afraid to be seen. But Clarence wasn't afraid. He was resigned. Resigned to the stares that never lasted long enough to recognize him. Resigned to the way white employees clutched their phones tighter when they passed him alone in a hallway. Resigned to the way even the junior interns called him boss with mock sympathy in their tone. What none of them knew, what none of them bothered to ask, was that Clarence once ran a math department in Georgia, at a school they later shut down, citing inconsistent achievement scores, which was code for they didn't want to keep funding mostly black schools. He had degrees, awards, newspaper clippings folded neatly in a shoebox under his bed. Now he had bleach. No one at Thornton Dynamics would ever imagine that the man mopping the executive wing once taught vector calculus and created lesson plans cited by Ivy League curriculum boards. That was the story Clarence carried in silence, folded behind the worn fabric of his uniform and stitched into his soul like a secret nobody asked for. His shift started at 6 p.m., when most of the building emptied out, except for late-night finance analysts and sleep-deprived assistants. It was safer then. Quiet. Less eyes on him. Clarence liked it that way. Except for the girl. The first time he saw her was 3 months ago, on the 18th floor. She stood barely 4 feet tall, a little shadow behind the tall glass door of her mother's office, watching him. Big, pale green eyes that followed him without fear or shame. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. He paused once, meeting her stare for a moment, before bowing his head and continuing down the hall. Her name was Lena. He learned that from the receptionist, who often complained to another assistant. I don't know why Miss Thornton keeps bringing that girl here. This ain't a daycare. Abigail Thornton, CEO of Thornton Dynamics, was a force of nature. Her face was on the cover of Forbes 3 times. Her voice never wavered. Her posture never bent. She was the kind of woman who wore tailored navy suits and spiked heels like armor. Her eyes were cool and calculating, and she moved through rooms like she owned the air inside them. She did not smile often, especially not at her daughter. Clarence only ever saw Lena during those after-hours evenings, when Abigail stayed late, always focused on spreadsheets or negotiations, while her daughter sat silently in the corner with school books and headphones. Sometimes Clarence found abandoned homework in the hallway. Crumpled papers, pencils worn to the nub, a pink backpack half-zipped and forgotten. He noticed her math problems first, scribbled in red ink with big X's, lots of them. Basic equations, fractions, percentages, mistakes circled with frustration. Clarence could almost see her struggle on the page. The pressure, the confusion, the disappointment. Something about it struck a deep chord in him. He'd taught kids like her. Kids with sharp minds but no confidence. Kids who stopped raising their hands after enough wrong answers. Kids who learned to hide their intelligence to avoid embarrassment. He lingered by the trash can that night, just for a second, and saw it, a half-torn worksheet, ripped clean down the middle, folded twice, then tossed. Clarence's fingers hovered over the paper before he reached down, heart thumping harder than it should. He smoothed the page open. Name, Lena Thornton. He looked down the list of problems. Almost all wrong. But there, between the margins, were faint marks. Notes. Little doodles. A question mark drawn into the shape of a cat. She was thinking. Trying. He could tell. She wasn't careless. She was confused. No one had taught her the right way. They just judged her when she failed. Clarence glanced down the hallway. Empty. He folded the paper neatly and slipped it into his pocket. It wasn't the first time the world discarded something brilliant. Clarence didn't sleep much that night. He stared at Lena's paper under the dull yellow light of his studio apartment. The radiator rattled. The ceiling leaked. But he barely noticed. His mind was alive again, spinning with the rhythm he once felt when prepping for a classroom full of eager minds. He pulled out a pad, then another. He started drafting simple examples. Then more challenging ones, diagrams. Word problems turned into stories. Strategies he used to help students connect emotion to logic. Because math to Clarence was never cold, it was art. By morning, he had assembled a mini lesson. 7 sheets. Clear, simple, intuitive. And he knew exactly where to leave them. Abigail Thornton was oblivious. She was busy finalizing a multi-million-dollar merger, locked in meetings, her phone buzzing every 2 minutes. She didn't notice the way Lena perked up during their evening visits. Didn't see her leaning closer to her school books. Didn't ask why her eraser was nearly gone, or why her math binder was suddenly color-coded. And Clarence never looked in her direction when she passed. He couldn't afford to, but Lena noticed. One evening, as she walked past him in the hallway, she whispered without looking, "Thank you." Clarence kept pushing his mop, not breaking stride. But his eyes softened. She had figured it out. And from then on, the ritual began. Each night, Clarence left a new sheet, tucked beneath her math book, disguised as scratch paper. Lena always found it. She always completed it. And she always got better. Clarence kept every discarded version, reviewing her mistakes, adjusting his next lesson. It became their silent connection. Wordless, invisible, and it changed them both. But secrets, even gentle ones, don't stay hidden forever. One Friday night, long past sunset, Abigail returned to her office to grab a forgotten tablet. Lena was with her, dragging her backpack sleepily. The cleaning crew was already on the 19th floor. Clarence was in the conference room, wiping down the long glass table, when he noticed something strange. Lena's math book, left open on the window ledge. Pages flipped, revealing today's lesson. Clarence stepped closer. He had made the problem trickier that night, introducing multi-step reasoning. He was proud of her work, but the page was blank. No answers, no pencil marks, just the words, "I don't get it." Clarence stared. She hadn't even tried. And then he heard it. The voice. It's cold, sharp. "I told you, Lena. Focus. You're never going to improve if you don't apply yourself." Abigail. Standing just outside the door. Lena stood small, eyes lowered. "I did try," she mumbled. "It just didn't make sense." Abigail exhaled through her nose. "Well, maybe you need another tutor. The last one said you didn't retain anything." "I didn't like him." "That's not the point." They walked away, voices fading. Clarence looked back at the page. Then he made a decision. He wrote one line at the bottom. "Try drawing the problem as a story. Pretend the numbers are characters." Then he closed the book and placed it carefully back on the ledge. The next day he found a post-it stuck to his mop cart. The story thing worked. The numbers were pirates. "I got it." Clarence smiled for the first time in weeks. But that same night, something happened that would shift everything. He had just finished the 23rd floor, heading toward the stairwell, when he saw it, a trash bin outside Abigail's office, overflowing. Something white caught his eye. He leaned closer. A crumpled sheet of paper, torn almost clean in half, scribbles all over it. Pencil smudges. He pulled it out carefully, smoothed it flat. It was another worksheet, more advanced, algebra. But something about it felt familiar. The format, the layout. Then he saw the bottom, his own handwriting, and the name at the top, Lena Thornton. Clarence stared at it, his breath catching. Why was his worksheet in the trash? Why was it torn? And most importantly, who had found it? Was someone watching their secret all along? Lena Thornton had learned not to cry in class. At 12 years old, inside the cold halls of Briarwood Academy, Chicago's elite prep school for the powerful and connected, tears were a form of social suicide. The girls here wore confidence like lipstick. They laughed with their mouths closed. They answered questions like they were rehearsed. Lena wasn't like them. She stumbled over words when called on. Her uniform was always a little wrinkled. Her hair never quite fell the right way. And worst of all, she was behind in math. Way behind. Her teachers whispered it during parent conferences. "We think Lena might have a processing delay, or maybe it's an attention issue." Others weren't as kind. Her math teacher, Mrs. Winstead once tapped a red pen on Lena's worksheet in front of the whole class and said, "You're not even trying, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, burned worse than any insult. At home it was even worse. Abigail Thornton didn't do failure. She was America's youngest self-made female billionaire. She had closed deals in high-rises with oil tycoons, stood toe-to-toe with congressmen, and walked out richer. But when it came to her daughter's struggles, Abigail became cold. "Lena, this is basic subtraction," she said one night, sliding the paper across the table. "I know," Lena snapped, defensive and flustered. "No, you clearly don't." "I'm trying." "Trying isn't good enough." The words landed like ice water. Lena pushed the worksheet away and retreated into silence. She knew what came next. Another tutor. Another adult she couldn't connect with. Another person who explained things too fast or too flat, then looked at her like she was wasting their time. The only person who never judged her was someone she'd never even seen. It started 2 weeks after that night. Clarence found her torn worksheet. Lena opened her math book in study hall and froze. There, tucked between the pages, was a single loose sheet. No name, no title, just math problems. And underneath each one, handwritten notes in neat, slanted print. Try breaking the top number into smaller parts. Think of the denominator as slices of pizza. What's the story this equation is trying to tell? It was like the worksheet was speaking to her, not at her. That night, she completed every problem. Not perfectly, but better. Something clicked. For the first time in months, math didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a puzzle. She didn't tell her mother. She didn't even tell her nanny, Diana, the one person who actually listened. Lena was too afraid it would vanish if she said it out loud. But the notes kept coming. Not every day, just when she needed them most. Sometimes after a hard test. Sometimes after a new topic was introduced. Always tucked neatly inside her folder, or slipped behind her notebook. They were always in pencil. She started leaving the last problem blank on purpose, just to see what feedback she'd get. And it came. Every time. It was like a silent game of chess. One move at a time. No names. No explanations. Lena started calling them the helper. Diana was the first to notice something had changed. "You've been spending more time on homework lately," she said one evening, peeking into Lena's room. "I thought you hated math." "I still do," Lena replied, scribbling into her workbook. "Then why the sudden interest?" Lena shrugged. "I don't know. I think I'm starting to get it." Diana tilted her head. Something was off. She walked over, gently lifting Lena's workbook. Her eyebrows lifted. "These are algebraic expressions. So, this wasn't in your lesson plan. And your tutor didn't teach you this." Lena's cheeks flushed. "Maybe I picked it up." Diana didn't push, but she noticed the handwriting, light pencil marks between the lines. Whoever was helping Lena wasn't a tutor, and they weren't doing it for credit. At school, Lena's grades started to climb. Just barely, but enough to raise eyebrows. Mrs. Winstead pulled her aside one afternoon. "Did your parents get you another private tutor?" Lena shook her head. "Then how are you suddenly improving?" "I'm just learning better now," Lena said, eyes low. The teacher didn't believe her. That night, Abigail received an email titled, "Suspicious Academic Performance, Lena Thornton." Abigail didn't respond. She was too busy finalizing a licensing deal in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Clarence continued his routine. The worksheets weren't just a kindness, they were his anchor. Each page he left behind was a reminder of who he used to be, of the life stolen from him by a system that only saw his skin and not his worth. He told no one, not even his cousin, Terence, who sometimes picked him up after shifts and asked why he looked more tired than usual. "I'm just thinking," Clarence would say. The truth was, he'd become emotionally invested. Lena reminded him of the best students he ever taught, the ones who didn't need more intelligence, just more belief. But one thing kept nagging at him. Someone was watching. He'd noticed it 3 times now. The strange way Lena's math book would sometimes be missing from the shelf when he arrived, only to reappear minutes later. The side-eye glances from a new security guard, who started tracking his movements with a little too much interest. And then there was the crumpled worksheet, torn and dumped in the trash. Clarence had a gut feeling. Someone had found out, and they weren't happy. One afternoon, Lena came back from lunch to find her locker wide open. Her books were scattered. Her math binder was gone. Panicked, She ran to the office. The assistant principal, a white woman with a tight bun and even tighter smile, looked up coldly. "We were just checking for unauthorized tutoring material," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means we've been informed someone may be giving you unapproved academic support, without credentials." Lena blinked. "I didn't do anything wrong." "That's not the issue. The school must maintain standards, and you must report any unauthorized assistance." Lena's chest tightened. "They weren't hurting anyone," she said. The woman arched a brow. Lena clammed up. The school returned her materials. The mystery worksheets were gone. But the message was clear. She was being watched now. That night, in the back seat of her mother's car, Lena stared out the window. Quiet. Abigail scrolled through emails beside her, disconnected as always. "Did you hear anything I said?" Lena finally asked. "I heard you," Abigail replied, without looking up. "They went through my locker. Like I was cheating or something." "And were you?" Lena turned, hurt. "I'm not lying, Mom," Abigail sighed. "This is what happens when you don't follow procedure. I didn't ask for help. Someone just cared." Abigail finally looked at her, eyes hard. "That's not how the world works, Lena. No one does anything without an angle." Lena turned away, jaw clenched. She missed her helper's notes more than she could say. But she had an idea. If her helper wasn't going to reveal themselves, maybe she could draw them out. That night, after pretending to do her homework, Lena flipped to a blank page in her notebook. She wrote carefully in bold, capital letters, "Who are you?" Then just below it, "Why are you helping me?" She slipped the notebook back into her backpack, left it half unzipped, hoping, wishing someone would see. The next morning, the notebook was gone, but something else was left in its place. Abigail Thornton's office sat on the highest floor of Thornton Dynamics like a queen's throne room. Glass walls, sharp corners, minimalist decor, and not a single photograph. Even the air felt colder up there, more calculated, nothing personal, nothing wasted. That was how Abigail operated. Efficient, direct, no time for unnecessary softness. Tonight it was late, well past 9 p.m. The building hummed in near silence, save for the occasional elevator ping or the quiet rustle of someone finishing their third shift of the day. Abigail stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, phone pressed to her ear, gaze sweeping over the city lights like she owned them. Her voice was low, clipped and controlled. "I'm not interested in the board's panic, Nathan," she said. "If they want to see the merger happen, they'll stop micromanaging my decisions. We're done here." She ended the call without a goodbye, tossing the phone onto the leather armchair nearby. Her eyes flicked to her desk. Lena's math binder was there. The school had returned it that afternoon after their locker review, and Abigail had snatched it immediately. She hadn't even looked inside yet. She assumed it was the usual childish doodles. Incomplete equations, careless mistakes. That binder had become a symbol of something she didn't understand, and didn't have time to fix. Abigail sat at her desk and cracked it open, ready to prove her point to herself. But what she saw didn't match her expectations. There were detailed explanations written lightly in pencil. Strategies, diagrams, page after page of work, most of it not in Lena's handwriting. And then, in the back pocket, a folded sheet, with Lena's words in bold letters. "Who are you?" Abigail frowned. Her eyes scanned the surrounding pages. Something about the penmanship, clean, methodical, struck her as familiar. But not from Lena's schoolwork. Not from any tutor reports. From somewhere inside this building. She stood up, walked to the door, opened it quietly. The hallway was mostly dark, lights dimmed for the night. But down at the end, past the executive offices, she saw a faint glow.
"Clarence!"
He was alone, humming softly, wiping the corner of the conference room table. Abigail watched him from the shadows, arms folded, lips pressed tight. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Something about the quiet determination in his movements unsettled her. Then he spoke aloud to himself, not realizing he was being watched. "If the variable holds constant, she'll need to isolate x first. But if she guesses, she'll lose the entire function's balance." Abigail's face stiffened. He paused, and continued, now muttering with calm focus. "Too early for functions, keep it visual. Story problems, let the imagination carry the numbers." Her hand slowly lowered from the doorframe. She knew those words. That logic, that phrasing. It matched the annotations in Lena's binder. She watched as Clarence adjusted the edge of the table and pulled something from his pocket, a folded note. He read it, then nodded once to himself and tucked it back inside his jacket. Abigail stepped back. She didn't make a sound, but her mind was spinning. What was a janitor doing tutoring her daughter? How did he even know math at that level? Why did Lena trust him? And why did he never say a word? She turned and walked briskly back to her office. Her pulse was quicker than usual. The next morning, before her assistant arrived, Abigail accessed the building's internal security feed. She knew the right codes. She approved the system herself. She typed in the date, then fast-forwarded to 3 days ago, around 7:50. She watched. Clarence entered her office, glanced around, then slowly walked to Lena's backpack, unzipped it gently, and removed the math binder. He didn't steal it. He flipped it open with care, studied it, wrote something inside, then placed it back. The footage was clear, precise, deliberate. No hesitation, no guilt, just purpose. Abigail leaned back, eyes fixed on the screen. She didn't know what angered her more, that someone had crossed her boundaries, or that they had done a better job helping her daughter than she ever had. The next clip showed Clarence sitting in the break room. That same night, he wasn't cleaning. He was writing notes, worksheets, diagrams, all by hand, page after page of content. She paused the footage, zoomed in on the paper. Her eyes narrowed. Equations, advanced ones, college level. Who was this man? That evening, she called a private investigator. 2 days passed. Clarence noticed something was different. He could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in the way people greeted him. Or didn't. The way security guards looked a second longer. The way the receptionist asked if he had authorization to enter the executive wing, even though he'd cleaned that hallway every night for a year. But what hit him hardest was Lena's silence. No new post-it notes. No new questions. He checked the usual places, her folder, her workbook, the spot under the lamp where she once left a thank you scribble. Nothing. He tried to shake it off. Maybe she was tired. Maybe the school was pressuring her. He didn't know. He couldn't ask. Because he wasn't supposed to exist in her world, not as anything more than a shadow. Still, he wrote another worksheet that night. Slipped it gently between the pages, just in case. What he didn't know was that Abigail had called the school that afternoon, demanding every tutor record Lena had, every academic evaluation, every teacher's commentary. The principal, a pale man with a polished accent, responded stiffly, "Ms. Thornton, I must insist we handle these inquiries through proper channels."
"I am the channel," Abigail snapped.
"Tell me why no one told me she was improving." He hesitated. Well, some faculty raised concerns. The improvement wasn't documented through official support systems. Frankly, we weren't sure how she was getting the answers. You assumed she was cheating. It was considered. Abigail's jaw tightened. You searched her locker. Yes. Did you find any illegal material? No. But you scared her. The man said nothing. Abigail ended the call. She sat at her desk, hands steepled, eyes burning holes into the wood. For once, she wasn't thinking about profit margins. She was thinking about shame. That night, she stayed late again. Clarence was finishing the south corridor when she stepped silently into the hallway. "Mr. Miles," she said sharply. He turned, startled. She rarely spoke to employees, especially not janitors. She knew that, and she knew how she sounded. Entitled, cold, suspicious. But what shocked Clarence wasn't her tone. It was the fact that she used his name. "Yes, ma'am."
"I want to speak with you," she said.
He glanced around. "About the floors? No. About my daughter." Silence. He froze. His hand gripped the mop handle tighter. For a moment, the air was too thick to breathe. Abigail took a step closer. "I've seen the footage. I know it was you." Clarence straightened, but didn't respond. "I've seen your notes, your handwriting, your diagrams. You've been tutoring her without permission." Clarence's jaw clenched. I wasn't trying to." "I'm not finished," she interrupted. He quieted. She was failing. "I threw money at the problem, hired the best tutors. They got nowhere. You somehow got through to her." He stayed silent. "I want to know why." He looked her in the eyes then. Not with fear, but with quiet weight. "Because I saw myself in her," he said softly. That caught her off guard. "I knew what it felt like to be told you're less. To be misunderstood. Labeled. That's how smart kids fall behind. Not because they're slow, because no one ever spoke their language." She stared at him. The silence between them stretched like glass. Where did you learn math like that? I used to teach. Where? Georgia. Then why are you here? Clarence hesitated, then said the sentence that changed everything. I was forced out. One bad arrest. One bad headline. No school would hire me after that. Abigail's breath hitched. She didn't respond. Didn't blink. She turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply against the floor. But she didn't go to her office. She went to security and requested every second of footage from the past 30 days. The next day, the head of HR slid a folder across her desk, Clarence's original background check, and what it had intentionally left out. Abigail Thornton had reviewed 1,000 background checks in her career, for CFOs, analysts, public-facing executives, but none rattled her the way Clarence Miles's did. The file HR slid across her desk was thin, but the air around it felt heavy, like it carried an accusation she couldn't name yet. No employee had ever been this invisible, until suddenly, he wasn't. She flipped through the pages slowly. Basic info. Date of birth. Education. Morehouse College. Masters in Mathematics. 2 certifications. 1 revoked. That line made her pause. Then, near the end, a single paragraph marked disciplinary history. 1 arrest. No conviction. But no context either. Not a word about why a gifted math teacher had disappeared from academia and landed behind a janitor's cart. Abigail buzzed her assistant. Get me Miles. Now. No delay. 10 minutes later, Clarence stood in HR, not with his head bowed like usual, but with a calmness that unnerved them. The head of HR, a tight-lipped woman named Geneva, took one look at Abigail's face and cleared the room. Have a seat, Abigail said sharply. Clarence didn't move. Ma'am, if this is about Lena, this is about you. Her voice was like flint. He slowly sat down, eyes unreadable. Abigail leaned forward. Why didn't you disclose the full story in your employment file? Clarence met her gaze. Because no one asked. That's not how this works. He folded his hands. I was never charged. That's why the record's thin. She studied him. Tell me anyway. Clarence exhaled. 6 years ago, I was a math department chair at Riverdale High, back in Georgia. We were underfunded, mostly Black and Latino students. I created a new math program, project-based learning, visual storytelling, team logic labs. Scores started climbing. Kids who used to fail were passing. A local news station even did a piece on us. Abigail didn't interrupt, though her mind was already racing. Clarence continued. A white parent complained when her son failed my class. Claimed I was grading unfairly. Said I intimidated students. The principal, who'd never set foot in my classroom, sided with her. They started watching me. One day, a student left their backpack behind. Security found prescription pills inside. They said I planted them. Abigail blinked. Clarence's voice remained steady. They arrested me during school hours. In front of my students. Put me in handcuffs, in the middle of 3rd period. Local news ran the mugshot that night. Said I was trafficking on campus. Charges dropped 2 months later. Student confessed the pills were his, but the damage was done. Abigail's throat tightened. She masked it quickly. Schools wouldn't return my calls. I sent resumes for a year. No one responded. Eventually I stopped trying, he added, almost as an afterthought. Found work up here cleaning buildings. Rent's cheaper in silence. Silence filled the room again. But now it was different. Weightier. Abigail's mind flashed back to Lena's binder. The neat notes. The patient tone. The growth. All from a man the system erased on a lie. She swallowed, cold realization washing over her. You shouldn't be mopping floors. Clarence gave the faintest nod. I know. Abigail spent the next 2 hours alone in her office, flipping through archived news stories. There it was. Teacher accused in drug scandal. A single photo, Clarence in handcuffs, being led out of a school by white officers. Face unreadable. No context, no follow-up, no correction when the student confessed later. She found the student too. His name changed, of course, but buried in a small update 2 months later. Teen takes full responsibility for substance found at school. All charges dropped. That was it. No apology to Clarence. No coverage of the damage. She closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. Then the email came in. From board chair, urgent. Subject Clarence Miles. Abigail, it has come to our attention, through internal chatter, that a member of your facility staff has been in direct, unsanctioned contact with your daughter. There are rumors of him accessing her materials without consent. We understand you are investigating. Be advised. This individual's background, if made public, poses reputational risk. We advise immediate separation, quietly. No formal announcement. Fire the janitor, or the media gets involved. That night, Abigail sat alone in the darkened boardroom, city lights flickering below. The board's threat echoed in her ears, looping like static. Fire the janitor, or the media gets involved. They didn't care about truth. They cared about image, containment, optics. It was the same sickness that got Clarence blackballed in the first place. She remembered how he'd stood his ground in HR, not with arrogance, but dignity, as if he'd been through worse. He had, and her daughter, her own daughter, had been quietly thriving under his care, growing, smiling more, engaging. That spark didn't come from tutors with Ivy League degrees. It came from a man forced into silence by a society that only heard certain voices. Abigail opened her drawer and pulled out a photo, the only personal item in her office. A picture of Lena, at age 4, sitting in a library, wide-eyed, pointing at numbers on a page. That was before Briarwood, before the pressure, before expectations stole her joy. Something in Abigail cracked. She made a call. The next morning, Clarence arrived for his shift, expecting nothing unusual. He clocked in, grabbed his cart, took the service elevator up to the executive floors. But when the doors opened, Abigail Thornton was waiting for him. Alone. "Walk with me," she said. No room for argument. They moved down the empty hallway. Clarence stayed a step behind, uncertain. "I'm not firing you," she said. He blinked. "I assume the board wants me to. They think you're a liability. Because I helped your daughter? Because you're smarter than they are, and that scares them." He looked at her, surprised. She stopped walking, turned to face him fully. "I need your help, Clarence." He was silent. "I don't trust anyone else with Lena's mind right now. Not the school, not the tutors, not even myself. But I trust you." Clarence's voice was low. "Ma'am, I appreciate that. But what you're saying would get me thrown out of my own company," she finished. "Possibly. But you've already done more for Lena than anyone on my payroll." He searched her eyes. "Why now?" "Because I finally looked beyond the resume. And because she asked for you." That part landed hardest. He nodded slowly. "I'm not looking for charity," he said. "And I'm not offering it." She handed him a sealed envelope. He opened it. A contract. Temporary education consultant. 6 months. Pay equal to junior executive salary. Full access to Lena's academic records. Clarence stared at it. "I'm giving you what the world stole," Abigail said. "A classroom. Even if it's just one student." He didn't answer right away, but for the first time in years, his shoulders lifted. Not with hope, with purpose. Down the hall, Abigail's assistant watched from behind the corner, phone in hand, recording. The footage wouldn't go to the board, not yet, because he had another buyer in mind. A tabloid editor with a vendetta against Abigail Thornton.
And in that video, it looked like something more than just a conversation.
It looked like favoritism. It looked like scandal. And it was about to go viral. That night, someone anonymously leaks the footage with the caption, "Why is the billionaire CEO secretly meeting with a janitor behind closed doors?" Abigail Thornton had never set foot in the curriculum office at Briarwood Academy before. She usually left school matters to Lena's assigned education coordinator, another well-paid professional, who in hindsight, had likely never understood her daughter at all. But today, Abigail was here herself, wearing a cashmere coat over her power suit, heels echoing through the glossy tiled halls of the school's administrative wing. Her presence sent ripples. Heads turned, voices dropped. She hadn't come to be polite. Earlier that morning, her inbox had exploded. The leaked footage had spread like wildfire. A grainy clip of Abigail talking to Clarence in a dim hallway, clearly mid-conversation. There was nothing incriminating, but the internet didn't care about facts. The headlines wrote themselves. "Why is a billionaire CEO secretly meeting with a janitor?" Whispers of favoritism at Thornton Dynamics spark internal controversy. Is Abigail Thornton hiding more than just profits? Blogs speculated about workplace scandals. Anonymous employees on forums spun conspiracies. And the board, furious and frantic, demanded she resolve the optics immediately. But Abigail wasn't interested in optics anymore. She was interested in truth, which is why she was now in the Briarwood curriculum office, asking pointed questions with a clipboard full of notes. The school's curriculum director, Dr. Lucille Hargrave, was an older woman with icy gray hair, horn-rimmed glasses, and the smirk of someone who believed every decision she made was divine. She sat across from Abigail in a polished oak chair, sipping from a mug that said "Data is my love language." "Do you?" Abigail didn't bother with small talk. "Who designed your current math strategy for grades 5 through 8? She asked flatly. Dr. Hargrave blinked. "It's a combination of Common Core standards and in-house innovation." "Why?" "In-house meaning faculty. In part, we also incorporate findings from national conferences, think tank reports, and external workshops. We're always evolving." Abigail placed a printed document on the table. It was an excerpt from a math training guide Clarence had authored nearly 8 years ago, a pre-algebra curriculum built on visual learning, problem narratives, and incremental scaffolding techniques. "Do you recognize this?" Dr. Hargrave squinted. "Looks like one of the models from our 4th quarter module." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "It's from a framework Clarence Miles developed in 2016. It was published in a regional education digest, one that Briarwood's leadership subscribed to for years." Dr. Hargrave hesitated. "Well, it's not uncommon for multiple educators to arrive at similar approaches, but he authored it first, with citations, and yet your school blacklisted him for an unproven arrest that was later dropped." "That's not accurate," Dr. Hargrave said stiffly. "We do rigorous background checks. If there was a red flag, your background check failed to include the fact that the student admitted guilt. You only saw a black man with a headline, and now you're using his ideas without his name." The silence that followed was cutting. Abigail leaned in. "Lena's math progress over the last 2 months? That's not from your faculty. That's from him, the man your system erased." Dr. Hargrave's face barely moved, but her grip on the mug tightened. Abigail stood. "If I find out you've profited from his curriculum without attribution, I'll file a copyright claim on his behalf. And I'll make sure every parent at this school knows exactly how your so-called innovation came to be." She walked out without waiting for a reply. Outside, she stood still for a moment beneath the statue in the main quad, a towering marble tribute to excellence in thought. It felt ironic, hollow, like the entire school's prestige had been built on borrowed brilliance. Brilliance they never thought would come from a janitor. Later that afternoon, Clarence finished wiping down the executive kitchen and headed to the locker room to change. He wasn't expecting to find Abigail already there, standing by his open locker, holding something gently in her hands. He paused in the doorway. This is usually private." "I know," she said, not turning around. "But I needed to see it for myself." In her hands was a weathered black composition notebook, its corners bent, pages yellowed slightly from age and handling, written in block letters across the front. "Lena's potential. Week 4 progress." Clarence stepped forward slowly. Abigail turned the book so he could see. Inside were detailed notes, graphs, step-by-step assessments, not just of Lena's academic skills, but her habits, her emotional reactions to different problem types, her confidence curves. It was a portrait of her mind, a roadmap of someone who believed in her more deeply than any certified educator had. Clarence cleared his throat. "I didn't mean to invade her privacy." "You didn't," Abigail said softly. "You saw her, really saw her." He nodded once, humbly. Abigail flipped to the final page. There was a single sentence written in pen. "This girl's math intuition is years ahead of her instruction. She just doesn't know it yet." Clarence spoke, barely above a whisper. "She reminds me of my niece. Same spark, same doubt in herself, because of how people look at her. I wasn't trying to rescue her. I just couldn't walk past what the world was willing to ignore." Abigail exhaled slowly. "The school you applied to years ago. They're using your work." Clarence looked up sharply. "They adopted your visual scaffolding method. It's in their curriculum now, but your name isn't." His face didn't change. Not right away. Then he laughed, bitter and quiet. "Of course they did. You should have been leading workshops, publishing textbooks, shaping education policy." He shrugged, but instead I'm folding up mop heads in the basement. Abigail met his eyes. "Not anymore." He blinked. "What are you saying?" "I want to build something. Real. Permanent. Not a one-time contract. Not charity. A program, built around your methods. For Lena. For others like her." Clarence looked away. "You realize what the backlash will be. You're standing up for a man with a record. A black man with a past." "I know." They'll call it favoritism. I've been called worse. He stared at her for a long time. Searching. Weighing. Finally, he nodded. Then let's build it. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. The notebook said it all. But what neither of them knew, what had quietly started brewing behind the scenes, was the conversation happening that very evening at a local education board meeting. A parent had found out about Clarence's involvement. The same parent who had once accused Clarence years ago. The white mother whose son had failed his class in Georgia. She had moved north after the scandal, changed districts, even enrolled her youngest at Briarwood. When she saw Clarence's face on a social media post, praising the janitor who taught the CEO's daughter, she nearly dropped her phone, and she knew exactly how to weaponize it. She stood in front of the education board with printouts, screenshots and accusations veiled as concern. I'm just asking the board to consider whether it's appropriate for someone with a history of legal issues to be influencing young minds, especially unsupervised. Another parent nodded. Is he even certified? Is this setting a good example? Within 30 minutes, the room was divided. Some defended Clarence's brilliance. Others demanded an investigation. But one thing became clear: the past wasn't staying in the past. It was coming back. Loud. Back at Thornton Dynamics, as Clarence finished locking up the cleaning closet, he noticed something strange in his locker. Another envelope. No name. He opened it. Inside were pages from his old case file. Police reports. A blurry copy of the mugshot. Notes in red ink across the top. Reopened story. Leak to media. Target. Thornton. Angle. Nepotism scandal. Clarence's hands trembled. Someone was planning something. And this time it was aimed at Abigail and Lena. He turns the last page and finds a printed email between two board members at Briarwood, debating whether to remove Lena from the school for impropriety. The halls of Thornton Dynamics gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but they didn't reflect success the way they used to. Ever since Clarence's story began to leak in whispers and fragments across social media, the energy in the building had shifted. It wasn't spoken, not outright, but it was in the pauses before greetings, the way some managers looked away when Clarence passed, how the head of compliance now checked the janitorial schedule more closely than executive expense reports. Yet none of it stopped Clarence. Not the looks, not the whisper, not the growing online headlines. He still arrived on time, swept every corner, polished every glass panel, and then once the last suit left and the night hushed down, he opened the binder he carried in his janitor cart and got to work. Each night he designed a new kind of challenge for Lena. Not just worksheets, stories, riddles, logic traps disguised as puzzles. He once left a game called the elevator equation, where Lena had to determine which floor someone would end up on based on hidden number clues. Another night it was a letter from Captain Variable on a math pirate ship, using algebraic expressions to crack treasure codes. He even included hand-drawn diagrams, simple graphs she could color in herself to visualize functions. Clarence never signed a single page. He never asked for a thank you. He believed in one sacred thing, that the mind of a child could bloom in silence if it was watered with care. And Lena was blooming. Diana, the nanny, noticed it first. Lena started getting out of bed early to solve her math sheets before school. She began explaining answers to herself aloud, a habit she never had. The words flowed with confidence, as if she'd discovered a language she didn't know she spoke. She smiled more, not because the world had become kinder, but because something inside her had. Abigail watched it happen too, with a mix of wonder and guilt. Lena was thriving, and Abigail couldn't take credit for any of it. She began leaving work earlier just to be home for dinner, asking Lena about her progress with something bordering on maternal instinct, a reflex she was still learning how to wield. "How was math today?" she asked, one night at the kitchen island, watching Lena munch on carrots. "I beat the staircase riddle." Abigail blinked. "The what?" "The one with the stairs and the disappearing number. The worksheet tricked me at first, but I figured out it was a trap question." Abigail set down her wine glass. "And who gave you that?" Lena hesitated. "It just showed up." Abigail didn't press. She already knew. But hearing Lena call it he made something stir in her chest, an ache she couldn't name. Clarence had become more than just a silent guide to her daughter. He had become the one who saw her, who built her without needing praise. And she, a billionaire, hadn't done the same. Clarence worked harder now, not just at night, but inside his heart. He knew the world was waiting to catch him off guard. A single misstep, and everything he'd built with Lena would crumble under the weight of perception. He didn't blame Abigail for the distance. Her board had made their position clear, and she was already walking a line no white executive ever dared to cross. He'd become radioactive to the institution, even as his methods were healing her daughter. One evening after everyone left, Clarence paused near Lena's folder in her mother's office and carefully slid in a folded packet titled Real-World Math, Rent, Groceries, and Gas. Inside were scenarios disguised as word problems: single mom with a $200 grocery budget, a teenager calculating bus fares to part-time jobs, housing cost breakdowns by neighborhood. Each problem was designed to teach algebra through life, not luxury. Because he knew Lena needed to learn more than numbers. She needed context, humanity, truth. What he didn't know was that someone else had started watching again. This time, not with a phone, but with intent. At Briarwood Academy, the head of academic integrity, Mrs. Judith Parson, was reviewing a stack of monthly progress reports when she noticed a sudden anomaly. Lena Thornton's math scores had jumped nearly 3 grade levels in 7 weeks. Impressive, but impossible. She pulled up Lena's academic record. The improvement was too steep, too sudden, and lacked institutional support. No tutor logs, no session notes, just silent growth. Suspicious. That same afternoon, she summoned Lena to her office. "Miss Thornton," she said, hands folded neatly, "I'd like to ask you a few questions about your academic progress." Lena shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. "Okay. You've had a noticeable improvement in mathematics recently. Quite a leap. Can you tell me what changed?" "I started practicing more," Lena said softly. "With whom?" Lena hesitated. "I just started understanding things differently." Mrs. Parson narrowed her eyes. "Did someone outside of the school provide assistance?" Lena stayed quiet. "We have reason to believe your work is being influenced by someone unaccredited." "I'm not cheating," Lena said, sharper than intended. "No one said you were, but if someone is helping you, especially someone not certified, that's a violation of our academic policy." Lena looked down and said nothing. That night, an email landed in Abigail's inbox. Subject: urgent. Potential violation of Briarwood academic policy. We have reason to believe that your daughter has been receiving unauthorized instruction from an uncertified individual. This raises serious concerns regarding fairness and accreditation. Per our policy, we must review this matter with the academic board. Until then, Lena's enrollment status is considered under review. Abigail stared at the email, heart sinking. They weren't asking questions. They were drawing lines. Clarence found out the next morning. Abigail called him into her office, this time with eyes full of fire. "They're threatening to expel her," she said. "Because of you." Clarence sat down slowly. "Then I'll step away." "No," she said quickly. "That's not what I meant. It's what they want," he replied. "And maybe it's what you need to protect her." Abigail stood abruptly. "You think that's what I want? For you to vanish and let them rewrite the truth again?" Clarence was quiet. Abigail softened. "You built her mind when everyone else gave up. But they don't care. They see you as a risk, not a resource." He spoke carefully. "So what happens next?" She opened a folder and pushed it across the table. Inside, her official response to the school. She'd written it herself. It defended Clarence's role, cited his methods, attached proof of his original curriculum, declared Lena's improvements as authentic and based on real engagement, not cheating or manipulation. Clarence looked up, shocked. "You're not backing down?" "I'm not letting them shame a girl for learning differently, or destroy a man for daring to care." He leaned back, silent. Abigail continued. "But they won't go down easy. They'll dig deeper. And they'll come for your past. I've lived with that for years," he said. "Let them." Abigail gave a nod. "Then we fight." At Briarwood, the board convened within 48 hours. A closed session. No press, just concerned faces, hushed tones, and fear masquerading as policy. They called it a matter of fairness. They said Lena's progress could create a precedent for other students, that if they allowed Clarence's involvement, they'd be opening the door for non-traditional education pathways. Their way of saying they didn't want black men with tarnished records shaping elite white spaces. Abigail attended the hearing in person. She brought Lena with her. They sat together at the long conference table, while the board listed their grievances. "Miss Thornton," one member said, adjusting his glasses, "we understand your daughter has benefited from this man's support, but Mr. Miles is not certified. His history, Was cleared. Abigail cut in. The charges were dropped. A student confessed. But our families expect high standards. Clarence Miles built a learning model you now use. He created the framework for your math curriculum. If that's not high standard, what is? The room went silent. Lena looked up at her mother with awe. But the chairperson cleared his throat. The issue remains. His involvement violates our protocol, and as such we must consider removing Lena until further notice. Lena's breath caught. Clarence wasn't in the room, but his work was. Abigail stood. Her voice didn't rise, but it was razor sharp. If you expel her, I'll go public. With every inconsistency, every stolen method, every racially biased policy you've buried under red tape. This isn't just about my daughter. This is about what kind of knowledge you're willing to accept, and what kind you refuse to acknowledge, unless it comes in a palatable package. The board looked stunned. She leaned in. And I promise you, the media will eat this alive. She didn't wait for their vote. She walked Lena out. And within an hour, the first email hit her inbox. Pending further review, Lena Thornton's status will remain active. We will not proceed with disciplinary action at this time. But Clarence never got that email. Because while they were fighting policy, someone else had launched a private investigation. A journalist. With an old grudge. An expose titled, "The Janitor in the Boardroom. Unmasking the Quiet Infiltration of Private Education," is scheduled for release, and Clarence's full past is about to be dragged back into the public. The Briarwood Academy auditorium had never felt this tense. The chandeliers sparkled above rows of polished mahogany chairs, but the atmosphere was electric with suspicion and quiet rage. An emergency meeting had been called, something the school hadn't done in over a decade. The cause? A single parent, a controversial figure, and an unspoken truth. Abigail Thornton entered without flinching. She walked with the poise of someone used to walking into rooms where she wasn't wanted, though this one stung more than most. To her left, a line of board members sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes focused, faces unreadable. On her right, the parents of other students, lawyers, surgeons, politicians, and tech founders whispered behind their hands, exchanging glances. Most were white. All were watching. Lena walked beside her, clutching a water bottle so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She had never been in a room this quiet, or this cold. She had also never seen her mother so exposed, not on a business magazine or news feature, but here, at a school where whispers moved faster than truth. Dr. Parson, head of academic integrity, took to the podium and cleared her throat. We've convened this meeting today in response to serious concerns brought forth regarding unauthorized educational influence on one of our students, Miss Lena Thornton. The murmurs began instantly. Abigail straightened in her seat. She wasn't going to speak until it was necessary. For now, she let them show who they really were. The issue, Dr. Parson continued, is not about improvement. We celebrate growth. But this growth, we believe, was achieved through unconventional and unapproved methods. Our policy is clear. Academic instruction must be provided by certified, verified professionals. Someone in the back coughed. Another parent leaned in to whisper to her neighbor, eyes flicking toward Lena. After a thorough internal review, Parson went on, we discovered that Mr. Clarence Miles, a janitorial employee from Thornton Dynamics, has been contributing to Miss Thornton's math development, without our consent or oversight. The word janitorial landed like a grenade. The room shifted. Whispers turned into gasps. One woman, sitting 2 rows behind Abigail, leaned over to her husband and said too loudly, "A custodian? Are we serious?" Abigail slowly turned her head, locking eyes with the woman. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The woman looked away quickly, flushed. Dr. Parson wasn't finished. As outlined in our academic integrity charter, such instruction from a non-certified, non-affiliated adult, particularly one without educational clearance, constitutes a violation of policy and introduces safety and reputational risks. The word safety hung in the air like smoke. Abigail stood up. Say it plainly, she said, voice level. You're accusing a black man of being a threat because he helped a struggling child improve her grades without a certificate. There were gasps. Someone scoffed. Dr. Parson flinched. I'm saying, Parson started. You're not saying anything, Abigail cut in. You're avoiding the truth behind pretty language. If Clarence Miles had been a white PhD doing the same thing in his spare time, you would have called it mentorship. But because he's a janitor, and because of the color of his skin, you assume danger. A man in the front, head of the parent advisory board, spoke up.
Miss Thornton, this isn't about race.
Isn't it? She asked, turning toward him. Your school uses a curriculum built on his ideas. Your students, all of your students, benefit from the scaffolding model he pioneered. But the moment his name is attached to it, suddenly it's unapproved? No one answered. Lena looked down. Her hands shook in her lap. Then, another mother raised her hand. If this man is really who you say he is, why isn't he teaching somewhere else? Abigail didn't flinch, because a biased system arrested him on a lie. A student planted drugs, Clarence was blamed. The charges were dropped, but the headlines weren't. He applied to hundreds of schools. No one wanted the risk. A pause. And then, from the same mother, still, this is Briarwood. We have to uphold standards. Abigail turned fully toward the room. Standards? She repeated. Lena was drowning in silence. None of your certified staff noticed. None of your tutors helped. But a man cleaning floors saw her potential and nurtured it without asking for praise or pay. That's not a violation. That's humanity. There was a hush, heavy and sharp. Then Dr. Parson, clearly irritated, spoke again. This isn't a matter of emotion, Miss Thornton. It's about protocol. And the protocol suggests removal from enrollment pending further review. The word removal hit Lena like a slap. She stood up abruptly, chair screeching against the floor. Everyone turned to look at her. She didn't wait for permission. He's the only one who ever made me feel smart. Her voice cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. But she didn't look away. Everyone else treated me like I was slow. Like I was wasting their time. Clarence didn't talk down to me. He left puzzles. He made math feel like a game. He believed I could figure it out. The room was stunned. Lena's voice steadied. You call that a violation? Then maybe your rules are broken. Abigail reached out and gently took Lena's hand, squeezing it. The strength of her daughter's truth shook her more than the board's accusations ever could. But the damage was done. The board didn't speak again that night. They recessed quietly. No decision made. But word spread fast. By the time Abigail and Lena reached the car, headlines had already hit the local news. Elite Academy faces backlash after student defends janitor's role in her academic success. And Clarence? He was watching from his apartment. He had never seen Lena speak in public. Never heard her defend him like that. He cried for the first time in years. But the tears stopped when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're not out of the woods yet, Miles. Watch the news tomorrow. They're not done with you. The next morning, Clarence wakes up to see his mugshot from 6 years ago, plastered across every major news site, with a headline questioning his proximity to children. The moment Abigail Thornton walked into her downtown office that morning, her phone lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. Missed calls, news alerts, PR flags, the kind of chaos only scandal brings. Every screen in the building seemed to show a different version of the same headline. Mugshot mentor. CEO's janitor has shocking criminal history. Another tab read, why was a child being taught by an ex-suspect? And below it, Clarence's face. Not the man she knew. Not the quiet, patient educator who changed her daughter's life, but the distorted version of him from years ago. Eyes stunned, cheeks sunken, a police flash capturing his arrest outside a Georgia school. They hadn't included the part where the student confessed, or that the charges were dropped, or that Clarence had been publicly exonerated. None of that mattered now. The media wasn't chasing truth. They were chasing blood. Inside Abigail's 42nd floor conference room, her legal team, marketing department, and executive advisors huddled around a long glass table in visible panic. We need a statement immediately, said Greg Sanders, her chief strategy officer. And it needs to distance you fast. Clarify the relationship, said one of the attorneys. Make it clear he was never officially authorized. The board's calling an emergency session, added Karen, her PR lead. And shareholders are already asking if this affects your judgment. Abigail didn't speak. She sat at the head of the table, elbows on the arms of her chair, eyes fixed on the image of Clarence's mugshot glowing on the projection screen. The caption below it twisted the truth like a blade. Convicted educator resurfaces as CEO's secret tutor. He was never convicted, Abigail said finally, her voice low. Doesn't matter, Greg replied quickly. The court of public opinion moves faster than fact. He's a janitor. Someone else muttered, as if that clarified everything. Abigail looked up sharply. Say that again. The room went still. The intern who'd spoken, a junior PR staffer, barely out of grad school, flushed red. I didn't mean it like, No, you did, Abigail interrupted. You said he's a janitor, like that disqualified him from being brilliant, from being right, from helping a girl the system forgot. A tense silence followed. Abigail stood. I built this company on merit, on rewarding skill, not pedigree. So tell me, are we hypocrites now? Or cowards? The room didn't answer. They didn't have to. Abigail turned off the screen. We're not releasing a statement. Not yet. Not one that throws him under the bus. Karen's eyes widened. Abigail, this could cost you millions. So be it. Greg leaned forward. You align publicly with this man and we risk corporate contracts, government relationships, school partnerships. Abigail stared him down. Then maybe those partners were never the right ones. Across the city, Clarence sat alone in his studio apartment, blinds drawn, coffee cold on the table beside him. His phone buzzed every few minutes with links and warnings. His cousin's voice still echoing from earlier. You're trending, man. But for all the wrong reasons. He didn't reply. He couldn't. He scrolled past the articles, trying not to absorb the bile in the comment sections. This is why we can't trust anyone. Teaching without a license? Lock him up again. What kind of CEO lets her kid near that man? His heart sank deeper with every word. Not because he believed them, but because he'd spent years trying to avoid exactly this moment. Years of silence, invisibility, isolation, all shattered in a single news cycle. Then came the knock. He knew who it was before he opened the door. Abigail stood there, no security detail, no entourage, just her. You shouldn't be here, Clarence said. I had to be. He let her in. She looked around. The apartment was clean, sparse, a bookshelf filled with worn math textbooks and composition notebooks. A small calendar with a photo of young black scholars pinned above the kitchen counter. I saw the news, she said softly. I figured. Abigail sat at the small table near the window. They're trying to erase everything you've done. Again. Clarence sat across from her, eyes tired. They don't need to erase it. They just need to distract people from the truth. That's always enough. I'm not backing down, she said. You should. She raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, you have a company to run. A reputation to protect. A daughter to shield. And you're a man who gave her back her mind. That matters more than shareholders. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not like them. No, she agreed. But I was. For too long. Clarence stood and walked to the bookshelf. Pulled out a folder. Inside were newspaper clippings, lesson plans, old letters from students, even a flyer from the education workshop where he first presented his scaffolding model. He handed it to her. You keep this, he said. Make sure it survives even if I don't. Abigail's voice cracked. Don't talk like that. But Clarence just smiled. A tired smile. One filled with peace, not defeat. I've lived in the shadows so long. I forgot what sunlight felt like. Lena brought that back for me. You did too. But now it's time to step back. No. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Abigail didn't open it. She didn't need to. Don't, she said, voice shaking. I have to, he replied. Don't do this, Clarence. I won't let you burn for me. She stood. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about what we value, what kind of world we're willing to defend. I know, he said gently. That's why I'm removing myself from the story. And with that, Clarence walked past her, out the door, down the hall. By the time she turned around, he was gone. Hours later, Abigail's assistant bursts into her office. He resigned, but there's something worse. Lena's school just voted to revoke her admission effective immediately. It had only been 36 hours since Clarence Miles disappeared, but already his name had transformed from a whisper into a national conversation. The story had spread like gasoline catching flame. It wasn't just the tabloids or social media now. It had hit the front pages. News anchors debated it with dramatic pauses and loaded language. Talk radio shows spun it as proof of liberal corruption in elite education. Conservative commentators called it a wake-up call about letting felons near children. Meanwhile, progressive voices hailed Clarence as a visionary silenced by systemic bias. But the facts, they were still missing. Every article started the same way. A black janitor with a past, who secretly educated a billionaire's daughter. Some painted him as a ghost, others as a fraud. A few labeled him a savior, but nobody could say where he was. Not even Abigail. She hadn't heard from him since he walked out of that apartment with nothing but a folder of his life's work. His phone went straight to voicemail. His building manager said he'd vacated without warning, His cousin hadn't seen him, not a single charge on his debit card since the resignation letter was delivered. And the silence was deafening. Abigail stood at her window, staring down at a press van parked across the street from her company's headquarters. Every time she moved near a window, they angled their lenses. She hadn't made a public comment yet. She couldn't. Not until she found him. Not until she had something real to hold on to. But the world wasn't waiting. The hashtag Den Clarence taught her had reached over 7 million views in 2 days. Celebrities chimed in with half-baked takes. Some called him the Black Robin Hood of education. Others urged caution. Remember, we don't know the full story. And at the center of it all, Lena. She hadn't gone back to school since the expulsion notice. Abigail pulled her out herself. Before the school could formally do it. They hadn't said the word expelled in writing. But they didn't need to. The implication was enough. Lena had taken the news quietly. Too quietly. She didn't scream or cry. She just went to her room, shut the door, and didn't come out for nearly 6 hours. When Abigail finally entered, she found her lying on the floor surrounded by every worksheet Clarence had ever given her. Pages and pages, lined up like a memorial. I didn't get to say thank you, Lena whispered. Abigail sat beside her, heartbreaking, in a way she hadn't expected. We'll find him. But Lena shook her head. He's gone. And maybe she was right. Because while the world was dissecting his story, Clarence Miles had vanished like smoke, the kind of disappearance only pain can orchestrate. One person wasn't buying the narrative being spun in the press. Her name was Simone Rivera. She was a veteran reporter at the Chicago Sentinel, known for chasing stories that made powerful people sweat. She didn't trust easy narratives, and she didn't follow trending hashtags like gospel. When she saw the coverage on Clarence, she didn't see a scandal, she saw a cover-up. It was the mugshot that got her attention. She recognized the format. Georgia, late 2010s. She'd seen enough to know something was missing. Too much vague language, too little context. Simone had a rule. If the story makes too much sense too fast, you're not getting the truth, you're getting the spin. So she started digging. Court records, education files, old interviews, archived news clippings from Riverdale County, Georgia. And what she found didn't match the story being told. Clarence Miles had been an award-winning educator. That part was true. His math team had ranked statewide in 2015. He'd authored a teaching guide used by several public districts. No complaints on file for nearly a decade. Until the arrest. The charge, intent to distribute on school property. But the arrest report was paper thin. No surveillance footage, no fingerprints, no direct witnesses, just an anonymous tip. Simone kept digging. She found a deposition, a sealed one. But someone had leaked a scan of it years ago on a private blog by a parent advocate group. In it, a student admitted the pills were his. That he panicked and blamed Clarence out of fear. The case had been dropped, officially cleared. But the mugshot had lived on. Even worse, Simone discovered that the court never issued an order to expunge the record from third-party databases, which meant every online background check tool still flagged Clarence as pending resolution. It wasn't just a failure of the system. It was a betrayal. She picked up the phone and dialed Abigail Thornton's assistant directly. I need 5 minutes of her time, Simone said. I have something she hasn't seen. And once she does, it'll change everything. Back at Thornton Dynamics, Abigail was trying to manage the fallout, both public and private. The board was restless. Lawyers warned of brand dilution, and a corporate partner pulled out of a pending contract, citing reputation concerns. Still, she refused to disavow Clarence. But she was starting to feel the weight. That's when her assistant knocked twice, entered without waiting, and said, "There's a journalist here, Simone Rivera. She says it's urgent." 10 minutes later, Abigail sat across from Simone in the executive conference room, the city skyline stretching behind them like a wall of glass and light. Simone slid a manila folder across the table. These are court documents. Proof the charges against Clarence were not only dropped, but the student responsible confessed under oath. Abigail flipped through the papers, eyes scanning fast. This one, Simone said, pointing, shows that the conviction was formally overturned. But this one, she tapped another sheet, proves the digital expungement never happened. His name still triggers in background checks. That's how your HR missed it. That's why the school panicked. That's how the world turned him into a criminal again. Even after the court said he wasn't. Abigail felt her stomach twist. They never erased it, she whispered. No, Simone said. And that's the story I'm about to publish. But I wanted to come to you first. Because once this drops, you'll have a choice to make: stay quiet and let the noise die down, or step into the fire and tell the truth. Abigail closed the folder. She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally she said, I want the truth out. But not from me. Simone raised an eyebrow. From who then? From him. But where was he? Simone had a lead, a bus station surveillance image, of someone matching Clarence's profile, getting on a Greyhound heading south. But no credit card trail, no phone ping, no hotel stays. It was like he'd never existed. Until the next morning, when a voicemail appeared on Abigail's office line. It was short, grainy, but unmistakably him. Tell Lena, I never meant to hurt her chances. I was just trying to help. I'm sorry. Click. That was it. Abigail played it 5 times, trying to hear something more. A location, a noise, anything. But there was nothing. Just a voice vanishing into static. Minutes later, Simone receives a tip from an old source. Clarence was seen entering a public courthouse in Atlanta, and he wasn't alone. Abigail Thornton had built her empire on precision, data-driven decisions, cold risk analyses, and relentless control over narrative. But as she sat alone in her office late that night, staring at Clarence's case files, sprawled across her desk, something inside her began to rupture. Not crack rupture. These weren't just clerical errors or bad PR incidents. They were scars, stitched across decades of structural rot. A black educator falsely accused, a student pressured into silence, a school board more concerned with reputation than restitution, and all of it preserved, not by law but by the indifference of people like her. She had played it safe her entire career, played within systems that rewarded silence, and now, silence was the very thing eating her alive. The man who had helped her daughter believe in her own intelligence had been destroyed slowly, methodically by the same systems her wealth insulated her from, and she had benefited from those systems. Every contract, every award, every polished quote about pulling yourself up, and hard work always rising, had been said without ever asking who got left behind. Clarence Miles was left behind, and it happened in plain sight. But the moment that finally shattered the dam wasn't a headline or court record, it was Lena. That night, Abigail returned home to find her daughter not in bed, but sitting cross-legged on the floor of her room, recording something on her tablet. What are you doing? Abigail asked gently. Lena turned. Her voice was quiet, but steady. They won't listen to you, or to Clarence, but they might listen to me. She tapped her screen. I'm making a video. Abigail sat beside her. You don't have to do that. It's not your burden to carry. Lena looked up. He never asked me to carry it, but he carried me. Every worksheet, every note. He believed I was smart before I did. The world's talking about him like he's a problem, like he did something wrong, but all he ever did was care. Abigail swallowed the lump forming in her throat. What are you going to say? The truth. Lena hit record. Her eyes locked with the camera, and she began, Hi, I'm Lena Thornton. You might have seen my name in articles lately. I'm the girl they say was taught by a janitor. She paused. But he's not just a janitor. His name is Clarence Miles. He was a teacher before the world got scared of his skin, before someone lied about him, before the courts dropped the case, but the world never did. Her voice didn't shake. He didn't break a rule. He broke through to me, when no one else could. Abigail didn't interrupt. She just listened, and with every sentence, her daughter grew taller in her eyes. Lena ended the video with one line. Bring him back. By morning, the video had gone viral. 23 million views, in 8 hours. Bring back Clarence trended worldwide. Celebrities amplified it. Teachers shared their own stories. Parents reposted it, with captions like, This is what real education looks like. But for Abigail, the virality wasn't the victory. It was the ignition. She began calling lawyers, real lawyers, civil rights experts, expungement attorneys, investigative researchers. She hired a digital team to sweep every site still carrying Clarence's mugshot and flagged false data for removal. She funded an independent audit of Riverdale County's education board, digging up internal emails and closed session minutes from the year Clarence was pushed out. And what they uncovered was worse than she imagined. The principal who had reported Clarence quietly forced out 3 years later, after unrelated misconduct. The officer who led the arrest, reprimanded twice for procedural violations. The student, pressured by his father, a school board member, into blaming Clarence under threat of expulsion. There were receipts, Email. Internal memos titled Avoid Controversy During Charter Vote. They didn't just fail Clarence. They targeted him. Abigail brought the findings to Simone Rivera. I don't want credit. Abigail said. I want exposure. Simone read through the files. Her jaw tightened. You realize you're going up against the same system you once protected. Abigail nodded. That's the point. Simone agreed to publish a feature. Not a scandal, but a full exposé. Titled, The Educator They Erased. Within a week, it dominated national media. Podcasts, think pieces, late-night monologues. The story of Clarence Miles, once smeared as a threat, now reclaimed as a symbol of stolen brilliance. But even with all that, he still hadn't come forward. Until one morning, Abigail's assistant ran into her office holding a phone. It's Clarence. Line 2. Abigail picked up, heart pounding. Where are you? His voice was tired but calm, watching from a distance. Didn't think anyone would come this far. You matter, she said, voice trembling. You always did. I didn't do it for headlines. I know. I did it because I saw myself in her, and I didn't want her to grow up thinking failure was her fault. Abigail breathed in slowly. We can clear your record, all the way, legally. And there's more. I want to start a program, your curriculum, your name on it. I'll fund it. I'll build it with you. Clarence was silent for a long time. Then he said, You don't owe me that. You're right, she replied. I owe you more. He sighed. Let me think on it. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. Just know, Lena wants you back. The world wants you back. But the call ended, and no one knew what he'd decide. That evening, as the sun set over the city, a mysterious envelope arrived at Briarwood Academy's front office, addressed only to Lena in Clarence's handwriting. The video of Lena Thornton standing in her room, eyes full of truth and trembling defiance, had done something no press release or lawsuit could. It touched the country's soul. In the first 24 hours, it reached 37 million views. By the third day, it had crossed 80. It wasn't polished, not professionally edited. It didn't need to be. It was raw, real, the daughter of a billionaire, speaking with the simple, unstoppable clarity of a child who had been seen by someone the world refused to look at. He made me feel smart. That sentence alone sparked a movement. Thousands of parents began reposting the clip with captions like, My son needed a Clarence. Black educators across the nation took to TikTok and Twitter, sharing their stories under the tag, Young Clarence taught me. Stories of being overqualified and undervalued, of being passed over for leadership roles in schools they built, of teaching white students who thrived under their care, only to be labeled aggressive when they asked for raises. Teachers began posting old lesson plans Clarence had once shared at free community workshops, calling him one of the best minds we lost to a broken system. And outside Briarwood Academy, things escalated. Protesters gathered, mostly black, some white, holding signs that read Black excellence belongs here, and certify humanity not just degrees. Alumni penned open letters. A group of Lena's classmates walked out in protest after their lunchroom conversation about the scandal was interrupted by a teacher telling them to focus on their own education. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Inside the school, administrators were scrambling. Parson avoided cameras, and a new interim head of student services was quietly installed to reassess recent disciplinary trends. But despite the noise, Clarence remained hidden. No interviews, no videos, no tweets. His silence became part of the legend. Rumors spread fast. Some said he'd left the state. Others claimed he was working as a teacher under a different name. A few even believed he was being silenced by powerful forces. The truth was quieter. Clarence was holed up in a rundown motel just outside Macon, Georgia. The carpet smelled like mildew. The air conditioner wheezed with every breath. He kept the blinds shut, used cash, paid in 3-day increments, so no one could trace him. He'd watched the video of Lena, over and over, until it felt like dreaming, but he didn't know what to do with it. The world was finally listening. But what if they turned on him again? What if coming back meant being destroyed all over again? He knew how fast admiration could become fear. He'd lived it. Once you scare the wrong person, your brilliance becomes a threat. And black brilliance, in particular, was always walking a razor's edge between inspiration and intimidation. So he stayed quiet, until the knock came. 3 soft taps. He waited. Another knock, firmer this time. He got up, heart tense, opened the door slowly. Abigail Thornton stood there. No security, no press, just her hair pulled back, heels dusty, coat wrinkled from travel. She looked nothing like a billionaire. She looked like a mother. Can I come in? Clarence stepped aside, She sat at the small table by the window. He sat across from her. Neither spoke for a long moment. Then she pulled a file from her bag. I hired a team, she said. We're drafting a motion to have your case fully expunged, not just removed from databases, but sealed, reversed, and corrected in the public record. Clarence stayed quiet. The Board of Education in Illinois has agreed to reopen your license review. If you apply, they'll fast-track it, with my company as sponsor. Still, he said nothing. She opened another folder. Inside was a printed contract. I don't want you to come back as a janitor, she said. I want you to come back as our director of STEM initiatives. He blinked. What? I'm building a new education lab. A real one, accessible to public school students, focused on visual math, logic puzzles, practical problem solving. I want your curriculum to lead it, your method, your design. You choose the team, you run it, you get to rewrite the system from the inside. Clarence exhaled. They'll eat me alive. No, they won't, she said, because this time, I'm standing behind you, and the world is watching. He looked down. I didn't want all that. I know. I just wanted to help one girl. You helped millions. He looked up. What if I'm not ready? She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. Then start here. He opened it. Inside was a letter, written in Lena's handwriting. Dear Clarence, I miss you. I still do puzzles every day. I even made one myself and stumped my math teacher. I'm not scared of numbers anymore. You gave me that. Please come back. I promise I'll make you proud. Love, Lena. Clarence stared at the paper for a long time. Then he folded it gently and placed it over his heart. Okay, he said. Abigail smiled. Okay. As Clarence prepares to return, an anonymous email lands in the school's inbox. If he sets foot on school grounds, I'm going public with what he did in Georgia. Clarence Miles returned to Briarwood Academy not through the back door as a janitor, but through the front entrance in a tailored charcoal suit, quietly flanked by Abigail and Lena. The air was thick with tension the moment they crossed the threshold. The receptionist, who once never looked up when Clarence walked past in his maintenance uniform, now blinked twice and stood a little straighter. Teachers glanced from their classrooms with quick, startled expressions. Word had spread he wasn't just back. He was back in power. Official title, Director of STEM Integration. Unofficial title, the janitor who flipped the system upside down. Within the first week, Clarence began reviewing the school's entire math curriculum, not to replace it recklessly, but to find where it failed to connect. He didn't enter with bravado. He didn't lecture. He observed. He sat quietly at the back of classrooms, took notes, watched how kids flinched when they got answers wrong or froze before raising their hand. Then in faculty meetings, he asked simple but devastating questions. Why are we still teaching this like everyone learns the same? What do we reward more, speed or comprehension? If students fear math, is it their fault or the way we deliver it? The resistance was immediate. Some teachers felt threatened. We've been teaching this way for decades, one murmured during a meeting. We have standards. Clarence nodded respectfully. But are we measuring learning or obedience? That didn't sit well. Others were more blatant. We can't just turn over our classrooms to a man who. A teacher paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound too ugly. Hasn't been through formal training recently. Clarence smiled gently. The last time I trained teachers, your curriculum borrowed the framework 3 years later. And that was that. Parents pushed back too. An anonymous group sent out a private email chain titled Concerned Families for Traditional Instruction. They questioned why someone with a history of legal trouble was being elevated over qualified educators. Abigail ignored them all. She funded Clarence's pilot program with private capital and made it clear this was happening with or without their blessing. Clarence created math labs in unused storage rooms. He brought in whiteboards, puzzles, color-coded systems, and math storytelling modules. He started a lunchtime open lab, where kids could come ask questions without fear of being graded. Slowly, students started trickling in, then dozens. Lena was the first to volunteer to help other students. A 7th grader who once hid her test scores under her sleeve was now explaining ratios using cupcake recipes to 5th graders. The shift was small at first, quiet, but the energy changed. Kids who had been written off as average or below level were suddenly the ones raising their hands. Clarence didn't just teach math, he taught confidence, and the faculty couldn't ignore it for long. Then came the test result. Citywide benchmarking scores arrived at the end of the semester. The data showed that Briarwood's middle school students had posted the highest single-year math score gains in Chicago's recent history. Not just in elite schools,
but across all demographics. Even more shocking, the biggest gains came from students who had previously scored in the bottom quartile. Every board member who doubted Clarence, every parent who whispered about merit and standard, every teacher who rolled their eyes behind closed doors now had to confront one undeniable truth. His methods worked. A week later, the school scheduled a press conference to celebrate the Briarwood league. The principal, who had been reluctant to fully embrace Clarence, now called him a visionary contributor to student growth. He stood behind the podium, praised the students, and thanked the faculty. But when reporters asked who had initiated the curriculum shift, it was Lena who stepped up. She grabbed the mic and said clearly, "You're welcome." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Clarence stood behind her, smiling softly. He didn't want the spotlight, he wanted her to shine. That night, a manila envelope was slipped under his office door. Inside, a formal letter from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, invitation to speak at their national conference on educational reform, keynote slot, expenses paid. The letter read, "We believe your insights have the potential to reshape how this country understands math instruction, equity and genius." Clarence sat at his desk for a long time, staring at the page. 6 years ago, he'd been dragged out of a classroom in now one of the most prestigious institutions in the world wanted to hear what he had to say. But before he could process it fully, his phone buzzed with a restricted number. He picked up, expecting another interview request or media inquiry. Instead, a low voice said, "You got the school on your side now, huh? Enjoy it while it lasts. Because some folks haven't forgotten Georgia and they're about to make sure no one else does either." Click. Clarence stared at the phone. His past wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, a viral video surfaces, edited to make it look like Clarence threatened a student during his old Georgia days, and it's spreading fast.
Clarence stood behind the podium at MIT, eyes sweeping across a sea of educators, policymakers, students and media faces. The same hands that once trembled while being cuffed in a Georgia classroom, now rested calmly on the edges of a microphone, as the conference moderator announced him as one of the most transformative minds in equity-based education. The lights were warm on his skin, but the pressure didn't choke him anymore. He wasn't here to justify his place. He was here to testify. The title of his keynote flashed across the screen behind him, "Seeing What They Hide: Uncovering Genius in the Shadows of American School." For the first full minute, Clarence said nothing. He just looked, let the room feel the weight of his presence. And when he finally spoke, his voice was soft, measured. 6 years ago, I was arrested in front of a blackboard, in front of students who thought I was there to build them. And that moment taught me something I never read in a textbook. America doesn't just underestimate black brilliance, it fears it. A hush fell over the auditorium. Clarence continued, every word deliberate, every line cutting through illusion. Our system rewards those who already feel seen. But what about the ones who whisper their ideas instead of shout them? The kids who solve problems backward in their heads because they're too afraid to raise a hand. He shared Lena's story, how she was falling behind not because she lacked skill, but because the system never spoke her language. How a worksheet tucked between books changed her trajectory, and how many Lenas existed, unseen in classrooms across the country, bright but dismissed, capable but erased. "We don't need more tests," he said, pacing slowly now. "We need more listeners. We don't need more metric. We need more mentors. We don't need more certificates. We need more courage." The audience didn't just listen. They leaned forward, holding every syllable. Clarence ended with a memory. "The day I was arrested, my favorite student looked at me and asked, 'Does this mean I'm next?' That question has haunted me for years. Today I answer him, and every child who's ever been made to feel small. No, you are not next. You are now." The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes. Educators wept. Students clapped so hard their hands turned red. It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning. And it didn't stop there. Within hours, the video of Clarence's keynote was uploaded to MIT's official channel. In one day, it hit 10 million views. In 3, it reached 27 million. Oprah's team called. So did the New York Times, Harvard's Graduate School of Education, and 3 different school superintendents from New York, Atlanta, and Oakland. Offers poured in, consulting contracts, book deals, curriculum partnerships. Clarence declined most. Fame wasn't his fuel. But he did accept one thing: a surprise meeting with the governor of Illinois. It was arranged quietly. Just Clarence, Abigail, the governor, and 2 senior education advisors in a room at the state capitol. The governor leaned forward after a long briefing and said, "Miles, I'm offering you a statewide advisory position. We're launching a task force on education equity, and we need someone who's lived it, not just studied it. Clarence didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked to Abigail, who gave a subtle nod, then back to the governor. If I say yes, Clarence said slowly, it has to be on my terms. Full access to school data. No token seats. I want hiring power. And I want to include former students in the design process. The governor smiled. That's exactly why we want you. Clarence nodded a quiet acceptance. The janitor was now shaping state education policy, but as they exited the building, Clarence's phone buzzed again, this time with a link from a known troll account. He almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. He clicked, and there it was. A distorted video clip from his Georgia days. He recognized the classroom, but the sound was edited. It showed Clarence standing at the front, his mouth moving, but the audio was replaced with aggressive-sounding dialogue. I don't care what you think, the dubbed voice screamed. If you can't follow directions, get out. Clarence's real words had never been like that. It was manipulated, designed to incite, and it was spreading fast. The caption read, "This is who they're trusting with our kids." Comments were flooding in. Thug, scammer in a suit. This is why we vet educators. Abigail saw the video 10 minutes later. So did Lena. So did Simone Rivera, who immediately called Clarence. We can get ahead of this, Simone said. We can prove the video's fake. They already believe it. Clarence replied. Doesn't matter. Yes, it does, Simone pushed. Because this time you're not alone. But Clarence knew what was happening. Power didn't like when the narrative flipped. They weren't attacking the video. They were attacking his permission to succeed, and they'd use anything past, present, or fiction to take it back. Simone receives a confidential tip. The video was leaked by someone inside Briarwood's administration, and they're planning to call a school-wide vote to terminate Clarence's program. Clarence Miles sat alone in the boardroom of the Illinois State Department of Education, surrounded by the very machinery that had once crushed him. On one wall hung portraits of past commissioners, every one of them white. The air was still, the chairs too clean, and the smell of polished wood carried a strange weight. The irony wasn't lost on him. The system that erased his name now wanted it engraved into policy. Yet nothing about this moment felt like triumph. Not yet. Across from him sat two state officials and a legal advisor, their smiles polite but thin. They outlined the offer once again, his role as executive advisor to the governor's task force on equity and achievement, a seat at the table, control over new curriculum pilots, full input on reform model, and funding. Real funding. But even as they spoke, Clarence's mind was back in Georgia, back in that moment, handcuffed beside a desk where a student once said, "You made me believe I could do math." That memory clashed hard against the email Simone had shared the night before, a whistleblower from Briarwood, who confirmed what Clarence had feared. The fake video, the distorted audio, the smear campaign, they were all orchestrated by a senior administrator who couldn't stomach Clarence's return to power. Worse, that administrator had quietly rallied support among the board to hold a school-wide vote questioning whether Clarence's program should continue. After the test score success, after the viral redemption, after the standing ovation at MIT, Clarence knew what it was. It wasn't about misconduct. It wasn't about policy. It was about control. Who's allowed to teach, who's allowed to rebuild, and who's allowed to change what the system failed to fix. So now, seated in front of the very engine of that system, Clarence leaned forward. If I say yes, he began slowly, I want full transparency. No secret votes. No advisory seat with no teeth. One of the officials cleared her throat. You'd have input. Input, Clarence cut in, is a hallway suggestion. I want oversight. I want the authority to audit programs. I want real say over who's hired to implement these models. The room went quiet. And more than that, Clarence continued, voice steady, I want a team that looks like the kids we say we're trying to. That means Black educators, Latino educators, people who've worked in schools like the ones we usually forget when the budget gets tight. The officials exchanged glances. The advisor scribbled something down. I don't want a statue or a PR tour, Clarence said. I want change. The silence lingered for a beat too long. Then finally one of the commissioners leaned back and nodded. Let's draft it together. Clarence nodded once. Then I'm in. News broke within hours. Headlines across major outlets read, once wrongfully shamed, Clarence Miles to lead state equity initiative. The public celebrated. Social media lit up again. But Clarence didn't head to a podium or issue a flashy statement. He went to work. And Abigail,
She wasn't done either. Watching the smear campaign unfold against Clarence had cracked something deeper in her. She realized that even her own company, Thornton Dynamics, had been complicit in its own quiet racism. Hiring for cultural fit that skewed white and male. A recruiting pipeline that ignored HBC. A leadership team that didn't reflect the brilliance outside of Ivy League credentials. She called her executive team into a marathon meeting and laid it out. Things were changing. Effective immediately, Thornton Dynamics would launch an internal equity audit, revamp its hiring system, and create 3 fellowship programs. One for STEM graduates from underrepresented communities, one for second career professionals, and one for formerly incarcerated individuals with proven educational experience. And then she made the biggest announcement of all, a fully funded $25 million initiative called the Miles Institute for Mathematical Equity. Based in Chicago, the institute would train teachers, develop inclusive curriculum, host public workshops, and publish research on how to identify and nurture hidden mathematical potential in overlooked youth. Clarence refused to let it bear his name at first. "I didn't do it alone," he said. But Abigail insisted. "That's exactly why it should." The institute launched with a live-streamed event, with Clarence speaking not from behind a podium, but seated among a group of students he'd worked with. He asked them questions. They asked him back. It was messy, beautiful, human. But even as cameras rolled, Clarence never forgot the email. The vote at Briarwood was still pending. They hadn't made it public yet, but insiders said the vote was close. And leaning against him, fear had not left the building. Still, Clarence moved forward, because he had something more powerful than permission now. He had purpose. That evening, as he reviewed new plans for the Miles Institute, a soft knock came at Abigail's office door. It was Lena. She walked in, holding a sketchbook. "Mom," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" Abigail smiled. "Always." Lena opened the sketchbook to a series of pages filled with colorful diagrams, logic games, and short riddles she'd written herself. "I want to help teach, not just learn. I want to build puzzles like Clarence did. Can I work at the institute?" Abigail blinked, surprised. "You're 12. So," Lena shrugged. "You always say talent doesn't have an age. Neither does purpose." Abigail took the sketchbook, flipped through the pages. Her daughter had created entire lessons with joy embedded in every margin. "You're hired," Abigail said, "but you'll need to make your lessons hard enough to stump Clarence at least once." Lena grinned. "Deal." At that exact moment, Abigail's assistant rushed in, face pale. "The vote at Briarwood just happened. They're shutting Clarence's program down effective immediately." The building hadn't changed much. The bricks were still red and too clean for a public school. The windows still reflected the Chicago skyline like they were hiding something. But Clarence Miles wasn't looking at the building itself. He was staring at the mural, 10 feet high, stretching across the east wall of the school he once cleaned late at night. When the halls were empty and his breath fogged in the winter air, was his own face painted in bold strokes of royal blue and gold. Below his portrait were the words, "Not every genius starts at the front of the room." Clarence stood silently on the sidewalk, his cane in one hand, the other in his coat pocket. The autumn wind blew soft but sharp. A group of high schoolers walked past, laughing, earbuds in, not even noticing him. He smiled at that. It was better that way. No flashbulbs, no questions, just a quiet second alone with something he never thought he'd live to see. The ceremony was starting soon. A national STEM summit, hosted in Chicago this year, had chosen this school, the same school that once voted to shut down his pilot program, as its centerpiece success story. Not because the school changed first, but because the pressure did. The parents protested, alumni rallied, news outlets exposed the smear campaign. When the truth about the fake video broke, how it was fabricated by a bitter administrator, and digitally manipulated by a third-party firm hired anonymously, the vote was overturned. The program was reinstated. That administrator was fired. And Clarence, he never returned out of vengeance. He returned to finish what he started. 4 years had passed since that vote. 4 years since the launch of the Miles Institute. 4 years of redesigning systems, hiring unheard voices, and mentoring the next generation of talent. And now, Lena was part of that generation. At 19, she was already nationally recognized for her work developing low-cost, gamified logic puzzles that were adopted in dozens of underfunded middle schools. She had just been named one of 30 under 30 in education by Forbes. But to Clarence, she was still the girl who left a note in her notebook asking, "Who are you?" That same girl was now standing on stage inside the auditorium, scanning the crowd as the music faded. Her curls were pinned back, her voice stronger than ever. Today, she began, we celebrate innovation, but not just the kind you measure in numbers. We're here to honor the kind you measure in lives changed. The crowd listened intently. When I was 12, she continued, I thought I was stupid. Every adult in my life, except my mom, treated me like someone who was always one test away from failing. But there was one person who saw something different. He didn't wear a tie. He didn't have an office. He didn't even have the right to be in my classroom. But he showed up anyway, quietly, carefully, and he helped me find myself through numbers. In the front row, Abigail sat with her hands clasped, holding back tears. Her once polished exterior had softened over the years. Power hadn't left her, but it had shifted. Now it radiated less like steel, and more like intention. She had changed her company, expanded the Miles Fellowship to 3 states, and spent most of her speaking engagements crediting others. But today wasn't about her. Lena raised her hand toward the side entrance. It is my honor, she said, voice breaking just slightly, to introduce the man who taught me to think, even when the world told him to be quiet. Please welcome Mr. Clarence Miles. The applause began as a ripple, then grew into a wave, then an ocean. Clarence stepped onto the stage slowly, his cane clicking softly against the wooden floor. As the lights hit his face, he paused, not to savor the attention, but to look at the crowd. Rows of teachers, students, leaders, families, some clapping with tears in their eyes, others standing already. They weren't applauding the man who once mopped their halls. They were applauding the man who taught them how to see. Clarence approached the mic, waited, then finally he spoke. I've spent most of my life trying to explain who I was, he said. Trying to convince people I was more than a uniform, more than an accusation, more than a shadow in the back of the room. His voice was deeper now, weathered but sure. And for a long time, I thought if I just worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, kept my head down long enough, someone might finally notice. But I was wrong. The auditorium went still, because the goal isn't to be noticed. The goal is to notice others, to find that kid in the back, who doesn't speak up, to write the extra example, to stay after hours when no one's watching. I didn't change the system, I just refused to let it change me. He looked directly at Lena. And when you find someone who believes in you before you believe in yourself, you don't forget it. The room was silent now, reverent. I don't need a statue, Clarence said, glancing at the mural projected behind him. I don't need a program with my name on it. I only ever wanted them to see what I saw. The applause returned, louder than before, but this time, Clarence didn't retreat. He stood tall, eyes gleaming, taking in every face, because this wasn't about redemption anymore. This was about responsibility, to build what others tried to burn, to name what others tried to silence, and to teach quietly, steadily, defiantly that genius can wear any skin, and often hides in the places people refuse to look. As the crowd stood clapping, a young girl in the 3rd row whispered to her mother, I want to be like him. And just like that, the cycle began again.
No one should have to hide their brilliance just to survive. If this story made you feel something, if you've ever seen someone overlooked just because of who they are, type yes. If you believe in justice, and subscribe if this broke your heart.